internet activities. His 30 years in the higher education arena has included work in the computer centers of Stanford and Educom, where he was responsible for creating the program of networks, and he has also participated in the creation of many organizations that are devoted to develop informatics institutions and networks in the last, including Chaos, the Society of Internet, and the very novel Internet 2. It is an honor for me to introduce Dr. Michael Roberts. Muchísimas gracias, es un placer estar aquí. Si todavía
I would say that I had journeyed into the far corner of the land of .ec. It's especially heartening to someone who has spent his life on the technology side of academia to see the commitment here in Loja to using that technology in the service of your educational and research mission. I think that we've heard this from the speakers this morning, the role of knowledge resources, and especially open knowledge resources, in reforming, revitalizing, reinventing education and the educational systems to greater service of economic development and social justice. This afternoon, I have a few brief remarks about how technology may contribute to the goals that we heard about this morning. Let's rehearse a little bit this afternoon at the beginning of my talk. Pardon me, we already have a small technical glitch. This is what I call the 3 Ds of the internet. It's a distributed network. Why has it grown from a few thousand internet hosts 20 years ago to over 1 billion addressable internet hosts today? It's a distributed architecture. It's based on layers and not on a silo of vertical integration. It's interoperable. The protocols of the internet are open source. They're freely available without cost anywhere in the world. The internet is a system that has, in a very short period of time, contributed to disintermediation of services in many spheres of society and the economy. That's a very large word, which basically means we now get to go direct. We can connect to the internet and get to a service provider or a source of information or a source of entertainment without going through a complicated and expensive process. These basic characteristics of the network have also contributed to the democratization of the internet and created a global communication system that is more widely available at less cost, and in the case of millions of students at no cost, than any prior telecommunication systems that humans have invented. So this is a very different network from those that people my age grew up with, and it's one that provides challenges and opportunities that for people in all levels of the world and global economies and societies that have never existed before. The challenge before us is to seize those opportunities and to use them well. So this part of my speech is to do with looking forward in time to perhaps a decade to what we're going to see in the internet in the way of technological change. The internet has always been a system of rapid change. When I first was involved with the internet in the 1980s, in the early 1980s at Stanford, there were a few dozen connections in a research environment. When Paul was asked to work on the design and implementation of the domain name system, people were worried that 500 numeric addresses was too many to remember, and would he please do something about it? So today, his basic system, his basic design still survives to service very effectively over 1 billion connections, and the basic protocols of the domain name system are invoked 20 to 30 billion times a day. So this is a remarkable achievement, that something that was designed for a very early environment, a research environment, today supports all of us all over the world so well. One of the important issues that's before national governments and technology administrations is how to deal with the improvement of access to the internet, and particularly to broadband internet environments. I think we all recognize, and Oscar's talk, I think, emphasized it, that it is critically essential that we all adopt the assumption, the demand, if you will, that broadband internet is the only internet that matters going forward. We cannot have the interactive applications, the integration of voice and video that we're beginning to see in some environments, without committing society as a whole to bringing broadband, hundreds of megabits per user technology to everyone. One of the approaches that's being used with some success in Europe and is being considered finally after much delay in the process of adopting a national broadband plan as a national governmental priority, is separating the basic access functions, which involve the fiber and the routers and the switches, from the applications. This allows us to create an open platform on which everyone can build and everyone can use without being held captive or hostage to the providers of the basic access and transport layers. I don't want to imply that there's only one approach to this, and I don't want to imply that I support a governmental solution entirely to this issue. We have a multiplicity of approaches today going on around the world, and what we need to do is to focus all of the people that are involved, whether they are private sector providers or public sector providers or government providers and policymakers, that the goal is to ensure that there is fair, equitable, and inexpensive broadband access for everyone. One of the other things that's happening very rapidly, certainly it's very evident here at LOHA, is the convergence of fixed and mobile access. In fact, for many young people, for teenagers, most of their internet access is now on a device that fits in their hand. You know, I come from an environment where I did 20 years worth of computing before I saw my first PC. So I'm sort of a fossil from that point of view. But it's very clear that as the internet reaches 50% of the world's population or more, that most of the use of the internet is going to be on a portable mobile device. We need to adjust our thinking to say what we want to do in education or in any other area of activity needs to comprehend that most users' primary interface is not going to be on a big device in a fixed place where you go to the device. It's going to be for devices that go with the people. Another rapid development is that, which is also tied to mobile computing, is that we're discovering a re-centralization of computing resource, of the server resource, is possible if you have a widely deployed broadband fiber optic network. When you go to Google, you notice that Google described this morning that Google will come up on your screen in less than half a second, or perhaps a second. Why is that? The latency from here to Google's headquarters in Mountain View alone is over 100 milliseconds. So that's 200 milliseconds to go there and come back. Well, Google is now the owner of its own fiber optic network that is very widely deployed, and it has put its servers all over the world. So these servers, because of considerations of energy costs and of greenness, they have invested millions and tens of millions of dollars in very efficient technology for supporting servers and switches in a centralized, very low cost from an energy point of view environment, and others are following. So basically what this says is that most of the computing cycles that are delivered to you when you use your device in the future are going to come from what we might call server farms that are located in places where electric power is plentiful and inexpensive, and where fiber optic facilities have been invested in and provide hundreds of gigabits of bandwidth to support the billions of users who need it. One of the other things that's happening very rapidly is that although there's still a good deal of development and research in the lower layers of the IP stack, most of the focus looking forward of the R&D and applied development in the internet is going to be in the applications area. There are many reasons for this. First of all, the lower layers are now in a comfortable place technologically, and we're in the process of exploiting that place that engineering and R&D has taken to. Secondly, we've created a network which has no precedent in the ease with which an interactive website for many of your programs, for your open resource programs, and those sites are accessible from anywhere in the world. And it didn't take 10 years to do it, as it was. When I was beginning my career in computing, you never committed to do anything in less than a year. And today, when someone in your chain of command says, I need an application up in a hurry means a week at the most. A weekend would be better. So we've completely changed our approach to applications as a result of the modular layered technology that the internet offers us. Finally, we have a critical mass, many times a critical mass of users and providers and researchers and developers all over the world have created an environment which is what we call coevolution. If you, for instance, I think the most prominent example is Google. Google has established a brain trust of very bright, very talented people in Mountain View and some other locations who are free to come up with new ideas and new applications and test them out. So in Google land, a week that does not have a new application or a new breakthrough is a long time. And Google, as a result of that, is able to respond to their advertisers, to their data resource clients, to the community at large, to their YouTube users in a very short period of time on a scale that's never been precedented before. And from a sociological point of view, it's really a coevolution that's occurring. And the value of that, looking forward, and why it implies a greater degree of participation by ordinary users, by concerned and engaged users, is because the feedback loop is short and the network can respond to your needs. And it can even respond in ways that can be tailored to your individual desires. So let's move on and talk about what some of these future developments are. And I should comment that I should make a couple of broad comments. First of all, those of us who've been involved with the internet from the beginning have not been very good at forecasting the next breakthrough. When the internet was very young in the 80s, it was a mainframe to mainframe network, and it was basically thought, well, it would be a good way to send email around. No one thought of the web. And so the explosion of web technology written down. There were not papers saying the internet will do this grand and glorious thing in 91 and 92 and 93. Likewise, the evolution of the search engine, of which Google is one, perhaps the most prominent example, the ability of high-speed search to transform the whole concept of information resources and to completely upset the traditional paradigm of librarians was not foreseen. You will not find brilliant academic papers that said if we had really fast search, all these other great things would happen. What you had was many, many papers that said, well, we might be able to use technology in the libraries. Let's work on that for a few years. Finally, I'd like to point out that the revolution we're in the middle of today with mobile technology was also not foreseen, in the same sense that the PC revolution was not foreseen in the mainframe area. So people didn't believe that you could put an IP stack on that you could downsize an operating system to go on a handheld device until the last several years. So I make these points only because we should have a sense of humility about saying that we know what's going to happen. I've tried to suggest with this slide some of the things that are likely to happen. I'm not sure that they will happen. So let's talk briefly about knowledge management. The very terms knowledge management are troublesome to many people. It's very, the notion, the schema of knowledge is subject to many interpretations and many definitions. Likewise, most scholars, if you said, I have to manage knowledge, they would say, no, you don't. You have to be a scholar seeking knowledge, discovering knowledge, preserving knowledge. So it's a very new thing for us to talk about knowledge management, and we're still in a very primitive state about that. So I'm going to make just a few very brief comments about it on this slide. First, the internet is accelerating the discovery of new knowledge. And that's new knowledge in digital forms, in virtual forms. That acceleration, that wave of innovation is clashing with most of our traditional notions of curatorship, of the preservation of knowledge, of librarianship, of places where scholars would go and present themselves and look in books to help their own scholarship. We have built generations of policy and practice and even law around the notion of knowledge represented in book form, and now we are presented with both the opportunity and the necessity of reshaping that tradition into a virtual world. You heard a very excellent presentation this morning by the Creative Commons representatives of some very practical, very pragmatic ways to begin to address this problem. You read in your papers or you see on CNN about the fights in the United States between the Recording Industry Association and the Motion Picture Association, which is trying to hang on to the old tradition of a vertical integration with a lot of overhead and a lot of profit. And this is again something that we're all working to try to deal with. So here are some suggestions, a very short list of suggestions about how we all might address this problem. First of all, we need to create institutional incentives for scholarship expressed in digital multimedia form. I think this is very consistent with what you heard this morning. We're talking about open educational resources in digital form, accessible to everyone at very low or no cost. Secondly, we need to collaborate within the academic community and beyond the academic community on new policies and practices to meet the needs and the opportunities of the digital world. We cannot, in some sense, we cannot go where we need to go without making peace with our past. We need also, because the private sector has entirely legitimate needs to have profitable private enterprises that are based on information and entertainment and so on. In other words, it's not the case that all information has to be free and have open rights and have no economic value. Information has substantial economic value, and we need to recognize it's almost up. Let me leave you with a few thoughts about challenges for academic users of the internet. One of the things that's very important to remember and remind yourself about the internet is that no one's in charge. There's no central command. There's no president, there's no general that issues orders every morning. In a very real sense, the internet of the future is going to be the internet that you want. I see many young faces in this audience. You have to believe, you have to act as though you have the ability to influence where this technology goes, how it helps you, how it helps your family, how it helps your city, how it helps your government, and helps everyone in society. In academia particularly, it's important for us to lead the revolution in internet-based knowledge. We know more about it. This conference is an example. We know more about the details, the challenges, the opportunities, the obstacles than the rest of society. So we have a role and an obligation to lead the revolution, to come up with new paradigms, new practices, new policies. Secondly, we need to commit ourselves as both individually and collectively to extend the reach of the network to all students. We have a saying in the United States, education should be for everyone, everywhere, all the time. That's a big commitment. That is very, very far from where we are today. It is a generational commitment to work on. We need to continue to promote openness and scholarship and fairness. There isn't any book of rules for the internet. The internet is global, it's multinational. Many people say it's beyond the reach of national governments, which is not actually a correct statement. But the kind of values that we are raised on in our academic institutions are the values that are intrinsic to the internet because it was incubated in academia. These values will not stay there. You all know. You all know about organized crime using the internet. You know about attempts to plagiarize in academia using internet text and other information resources. The way to combat those resources is not to hire internet cops, is to create an ethical and maintain an ethical environment in the internet which makes that unacceptable. The person next to you should feel it is unacceptable for me to steal information and use it for my benefit on the internet. Finally, we need to think about what does it mean to have an internet commons. The commons is a concept that goes back to the Greeks. There's 2,000 years of history in the concept of the commons. We have a commons partly because of the way the internet began, and partly because of the way it's been used, and partly because of the energy and enthusiasm of the people who use it today to preserve that commons. It's not easy. If you look back to the Greeks, if you look back to the Romans, many times the commons was threatened, and many times it collapsed and had to be reinvented. So I urge you to think about that when you're using the internet, whether you're using it for entertainment or for scholarship. Do what you can to preserve the commons of the internet, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roberts, for this excellent presentation about the future of the Internet. Nuestro siguiente invitado en esta tarde